Come on in, everybody. I'll be there in just a moment. Well, greetings, everybody out there in the interwebs. This is Zombie Force here. Just felt like putting it out there a little bit. Maybe help a few folks through a couple of things about what they may be thinking or contemplating or what's going on and all this other stuff. And it requires a certain bit of observations to certain histories and war and territories and whatnot. So you got to understand what's going on in this Middle Eastern thing here. I've heard one half a dozen of guesses about things that never happen or things that are just not going to happen. Some people, they'll be like, well, you could be wrong, you could be right, but here's the deal, like they say. You take a country like Iran and you say, well, we're in here liberating Iran, you know, and all these people are going to join forces and they're going to stomp out all the tyranny that's taking place. Oh, yeah. Here's the thing that people just don't seem to think about is for 3,000 years, those people have been doing battle with each other between the tribes, and back during World War I, previous to the settlement of World War One, and Europe's involvement into World War One was based on, okay, how are we going to invest our money into this Middle Eastern deal going on? And so some of the Rothschilds, some of the biggest private lending bankers in Britain, the Rothschilds, they were willing to loan Britain money for their involvement into the territories that were changing over in hands over in the Middle East. There was several pieces of oil. It was the oil, and before the major oil got discovered inside the Middle East, they knew about there could possibly be oil in the Middle East, but then an investor closely related into the Rothschild thinking says, well, okay, we're going to go in here and we're going to give this leader of this country, this little country down here, we're going to give him about 25,000 euros, and we're going to give him 5% of the profits of the oil. And you're talking 1920. See, before World War II. Well, anyways, the United States later on discovered that they had been left out in any kind of negotiation with anybody inside the Middle East concerning oil, and got a little upset about that. And then later on, the United States, was allowed to come on board in the wheeling and dealing that was going on with the oil inside the Middle East. That's only been going on since, excuse me, I had to make a little noise. But that's only been basically going on over this oil thing since back in the 40s, late 30s, early 40s. Pre-World War II involvement when it came to the United States. So later they was allowed to be in there with partnerships. The British Empire essentially snuck behind everybody else's back and made deals with the Arabs and the oil-rich areas of the country, and already had done exploration, drilling, and discovered oil. And the United States had to pretty much force their way to the table. And whenever they forced their way to the table, the wealth of oil inside the Middle East, the first ones that were involved in any of that oil was the British. And they had sunk exploration wells into the vastness of the Middle East. So later, they promised, like back in the 80s, 70s, and 80s, they had promised some of these countries that they would guarantee their statehood, and that they would have a statehood and have a place on the table of the world powers, just to be completely bushwhacked later which means that the United States and Britain and France and the best of the best leadership there ran into the Middle East and made oil agreements with the leaderships of the country. Essentially, over time, they traded out leaderships with country through the wealth of the oil coming out of there. But to bring people up to speed on understanding Iran, the Iran, Iraq, sup KP? But to understand that Iraq, Iran territory there, because the Sunnis and the Sunnis to the southeast, whatever, there's tribes there inside there, the Arabs, they all have a certain territory. And they tend to pretty much stay out of each other's territory. But the recent things that's happened is I was saying in a discussion with another person that the projections was they were going to take prisoners or hostage, and to interpret that means that the vessels that are flowing around through the Strait of Hormuz today, several of the Iranian tankers and ships outbound were allowed passage closer to the Iranian shore, around in a safe loop. And the only boats that's coming out of the strait at this time are ships that are being protected under the Iranian flags, which means they're getting clearance to come through there, but they're hugging the coast only because there's speculations that the mines have been laid off the western side. On the southwest side of the passage, there's mines that have been laid in those waters, and none of the major shipping lines want to be able to take the chance. And people understand that it's about insurance. See, it's not about the people piling into vessels or anything else. It's the insurance on the cargo that says we're going to have a lot of money to insure you to come around through there. But recently, claims have been denied to these ships and tankers coming out of the strait, or willing to take a chance to come through the strait, because you can't have a sanctioned boat, but one that's unsanctioned has to have insurance while it's in open waters and hauling merchandise. It's part of the rules of the merchant marine rules, which means that you have to have insurance on a cargo vessel. And the Black Fleet, Dark Fleets, whatever people want to call those fleets, those are fleets that they don't have insurance. They just pull up to the port, load the goods on there, go to another port where its destination is. They offload it, and they don't have to pay the toll of insurance, which some of the insurances that goes on some of those oil tankers out there is in the millions of dollars per journey, which means that right now it's around 10% to insure oil cargo coming out of that region. and making passage up through the Red Sea passage. But the fact is none of the insurance companies, and most of the insurance companies that cover that type of thing, are located in where? Guess what? Britain, you see. And the money markets and stuff inside Britain, you have to understand that the restriction of oil coming out of that region, which means that essentially the gas pumps have been shut off into Germany and Poland and a vast amount of NATO states and EU states and Britain from Russia due to this little conflict with the Ukrainians. But now the only oil that was available directly to certain regions of the country, India, China, parts of northern Africa, and the entire country of Britain, are dependent on oil that comes out of the Middle East. Why? Because they don't have an oil-rich country. And Switzerland and the rest of the little smaller island countries up there, they don't have enough production just barely to sustain their own market. They don't have that much oil. So the power play is between the oil, and then Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump and China. And I know this sounds like a big fat lie to a lot of people, but they've already reached an agreement to understand that Britain has been putting themselves out in this war machine for a very long time, especially since they done exploratory drilling inside that Middle Eastern region in there back in the 1920s. See, it's just like how long this has been going on. And then over time, they've empowered. It's like when Britain occupied India, and Britain occupied the Middle East in a lot of ways, and so did Germany. And that was for the oil, the oil supply. Because Russia, Russia doesn't have to give oil to anybody. It's got plenty. It gives its oil. It sells its oil to China on a mass scale. But it's like the fearless leader said, somebody else is doing it because somebody else is doing it because somebody else is doing it. And if somebody don't do it, somebody else is going to. The fact of the matter is it's about the country of Iran. And people have to understand that you have around 60 million individuals inside Iran as citizens and whoever they are. And the bigger majority of that population believes in the Muhammad. They are Muslim. And people have to understand that these people, even back during the wars, before World War I and World War II and all these wars, they have tunnel networks and cave systems and man-made bunker systems by the thousands inside Iran. Thousands and thousands with exits underneath the ground inside that country. And that country is a big country. That's not no little country. They have been entrenched and they have done nothing since the days of Ronald Reagan but bring on more militarization in their country. They've got hundreds of miles of tunnels underneath the ground inside that country that contain thousands and thousands and thousands of weapons. You have to understand that. And then I'm going to segue on up. I'm going to say that, all this hoopla and this cheerleading going on by the leadership, except and Donald Trump, and what they're going to do and how they're going to do it and all this other stuff. It's a simple lack of intelligence, and I hate to say that, but it is only because they think that if they blow up a couple of hundred bunkers or missile systems, you're talking about a country that has thousands and thousands of these weapons and thousands of exits out of these tunnels and bunkers that are built into that country. It's been that way for decades and decades and decades. And it's not because of Donald Trump. Donald Trump didn't cause these people to start building bunkers and weapons. They've been building rockets and bunkers and missile launchers for the last 5-6 decades on a steady. And people they get misinformed and they get in a different direction because somebody said something. But the fact of the matter is it's not Afghanistan. Not in no shape, form, or fashion is it somewhere like Afghanistan. It's not Kuwait. You see, these are Iranians. It's a whole different battle going on. And the fact of the matter is it's not going to be in there and out of there in any kind of weeks, as the fearless leadership has said. We took 20 years inside that desert in Afghanistan. 10 years, 5 years. And I'm going to guarantee you this. We were losing. You have to understand that we were losing. We were getting our asses kicked because it was impossible to find all the caves, to find all the tunnel systems, to find all of these things. After 20 fucking years, we pulled out. It was pointless. Well, Iran, my friends. Iran. Well, that's a whole different ball game right there. You're talking about a ball game where it's going to take 50 years to find and discover every weapon and every person inside that country that's not willing to put a bullet through the opposing team's head. That's just how they are. They're not going to bow down. They're not. And I heard this. They're making negotiations with the United States as we speak. No, they are not. There was an interview with a top official from Iran with a major news media, and their statement was they were going to do what they had to do to protect themselves and their country. They're not negotiating with Donald Trump over this. The fact of the matter is the agreements that's going on between a country like China and a country like Russia and a country like the United States, when it has something to do with Britain. See, that's the biggest one on the table as we speak. You see, I mean, when 3 major superpowers on this planet agree, and whatever things were said at the summits, then China and Russia had a right to come up and filibuster what was said, and they didn't. For the first time in history, in a long time, they have agreed with the United States over this issue with Britain. And it's a close association with things inside that Middle East and what it's been there since back before World War One, during the goings on of World War One. It's when all of this kind of started to come to be. So something has to be reestablished there as to say, we believe in free trade. We don't want people making threats at merchant vehicles on the sea. And Iran, believe it or not, has backed herself up against the wall, and they're standing on that. But then I'll just kind of switch conversation here and let you know that you've got people that have certain knowledge about certain conflict strategies and what's the plan and all this other stuff, and you try to be gentle to these people, and you say, well, you know, well, let's talk about the drones, you know, the drones. So you got drones in the Ukraine right now, drones, just regular old drones. You can buy them you can order them online through Walmart, drones, you see. But see over there, the Ukrainians and the Russians use the same kind of little drones. This ain't something some military drone company's pumping out and all this other thing. And I know they do use those type of drones, but they also use the drones that are capable of flying autonomously without the wire. And they improvise uh, an RPG round, RPG-7 or whatever it is, and they release these things on tanks. And I can show you some of the videos, and most of the guys that listen to this already know that you can see those videos out there where they're taking out an Abram tank, a tank with a little bitty toy drone that you can buy off Walmart, order it online, and an RPG round. And everybody keeps thinking this, and I'm kind of trying to say, hey, look, until you have faced these people inside that desert over there, shut your mouth, because you don't have no fucking idea what you're talking about. I know people inside the country that are very capable of being inside this country. They're very capable of going down here to the hardware store and here and there and whatever they got to order, and how they got to cook it up, and how they got to put it in the head, and how they got to put it, they got to put an impact trigger on that motherfucker and hang it from a drone and blow your whole goddamn house down. So shut your fucking mouth. You don't know. You're talking, oh, we're going to hide. We're going to jump down. We're going to hide from these fuckers. Okay, hold on a minute. Are you assuming that you're the only one that's going to know all this shit going on? Because you're dead wrong. I've seen improvised explosive rounds that were handmade from local products in the middle of the fucking sand road, covered up, blow a goddamn fucking armored APV into pieces, you see. And everybody inside that turns into this red liquid cream mixed with diesel and smoke. See, that's how it works. Just because you say, "Oh, I got plenty of seeds for my seed spewer." Okay, that's good thinking. I agree. Something may force you to evacuate your safety, your You're you're hunkered down. You're in it for the long haul. The only way you're sticking your head up is if you hear a noise coming. The fact of the matter is all of that can go away in just a few seconds, and all of a sudden there you are standing out there in your boots, whatever you're dressed in, your underwear, whatever that is. You're gonna be standing out there in the woods, and your whole fucking world is gonna be gone. All the food that you've stored back, all of the little gadgets that you have, everything. It was inside that house or inside that barn, which is no longer present and burning on fire. See, one of the worst things I ever had to do was door to door. I'd done some door to door searches in some very bad places. Luckily, luckily, like I said, I only got this scar up the side of my head and that hole in my leg and my wrist and my finger blown off for no fucking reason, I guess. That must be apparent. The fact of the matter is I believe in what people should do and how people should be prepared, but I also believe that they shouldn't live on assumption. They only assume based on their training. Well, hold on a minute. If it was based on your training and you got some of your training and some of your foot on the ground stuff, maybe down there in Africa somewhere, maybe over there in the island off the Japanese islands or somewhere in Guam, who knows where you was at. But the fact of the matter is, it's a different situation against people that are really, they're just out to end you at all cost. That means if they have to sacrifice their self to wait up inside, whatever it is, and push that button, that means everybody inside that structure is a goner. So that's the difference. That's the flip to it. See, it's not how you are going to get into some room with all these enemies and get them all and get back out safely. You see, that get back out safety shit. These motherfuckers, they don't care if they get back out or not. That's just the way life is. They don't care. They do not care if they kill anybody. That's what they are going to do. There's no thinking about it. And it's a hard life. It really is. I see guys that I knew that are no longer among the living. You know, they're no longer among the living. That faced things that is questionable, you know, especially when somebody says, hey, you got to get your ass up there to that fourth floor. We got to check every fucking room and every closet and every fucking everything on that whole fucking first, second, third, fifth floor, all the way up that fucking building. Well, wait till you get almost to the top of that fucking building and somebody blast the side of that motherfucker with a fucking tank. You see, that enemy over there, you see, they got shit. Tanks, RPG rounds, they got 7.62. They got all that, man. The fact of the matter is they know how to use this shit in combat. And a lot of people may not. They may trip up. They might lose their head. Some starts fucking shooting at them. They're going to lose their fucking head. Some of them are. They're not going to know what to fucking do. But enough of that. The fact of the matter is all the improvised things that exist. And you're talking about a desert town. That's going to get back to that. Iran, see, they're desert. Their people inside that country are primarily just to eat. You have to understand that. They don't have big, humongous fields of corn and wheat and all this shit going on, tomatoes and all this other stuff inside that country that's going to be able to feed all those 60 million motherfuckers living over there in that fucking rock. You see, the food has to come from somewhere, you see. And whenever the pullback on actually taking Iranian boats that are coming in and out of the Iran country there in the Straits of Hormuz, it means that it's a war crime to stop that ship if it's bringing in 3,000 tons of rice or a product, you see, food, water, provisions to the citizens inside Iran. It's against the rules of the world to interrupt that, which means that Hegseth and everybody else, they're pretty much on point about what they're doing. And I have people out here jumping up and down saying, well, why don't we just take every boat coming out of in and out of Iran? Because it's against the rules. You can't just cut the food off and say you ain't getting any. Ask Netanyahu what happened with him with this Gaza incident when they have hundreds of tons of food sitting there, and Netanyahu and Israel says, hey, we're going to look at this real quick, and they're going to hold up the food flowing into Gaza. It doesn't fucking matter who you like and who you pick in your team of war, but the fact of the matter is you can't starve innocent civilians. It's against the rules of the world. So that's one of the reasons why that the ships, the cargo ships, and some of the oil tankers are being allowed to travel in and out of the Straits of Hormuz. And U.S. military forces or nobody else's forces are out there going to try to do anything about it because they can't. They have a right to board the ship outside of the Straits of Hormuz in the southbound southeast lanes coming through there. They can board those ships and do an inspection. They have a right to inspection, but most of the time it's going to a country somewhere where the only oil that they got inside their town and their whatever is on that boat, you see. So that they depend on generators, they depend on other stuff too. So you can't really screw with that. And besides that, the Hormuz Strait of Hormuz is not closed. It's not shut down like everybody thinks. It means that certain ships that are coming in and out of that, certain associations of shipping companies, American shipping companies, British shipping companies, and some others are being encroached on, you know. But other ships from other countries are being allowed passage. And at this time, you can go to the ship data website right now and you'll find out that there's actually ships that are being allowed to sail up around closer to to the the coast of Iran and then exit the Strait of Hormuz uninterrupted, uninterfered with. So if a person like the Trump administration and their thinking is to say, hey, we're going to run in here. We're going to defeat Iran. And I'm just going to tell everybody, no, we're not. It's not that easy. These are not people that, they're the people in Kuwait and the people in Iran. That's a whole different brood of individuals. The meeting that Trump had a meeting previous to this matter with the Straits of Hormuz. Days before that, he had a meeting with the oil leadership exploration companies of the world. You know, what's up, Kane Corso? So you got a meeting going on and taking place with Donald Trump and the leading oil exploration companies, the world leaders in oil, sitting at a table deciding on what they were going to do. You see, a few days later, the Strait of Hormuz, the shit got real heavy with Iran. Well, what happens is you have millions and millions of gallons of barrels, not gallons, barrels of oil that stops flowing. And the real number on that is 25%, not 20, not 5. It's 25% of the oil trade worldwide. You have to understand how big that is. That's enormous. It means, here's what it means, 25%. It means that about 18% of the world are not getting any petroleum until that Strait of Hormuz is reopened. That's what that means. So you got China's being put in a squeeze. They were the biggest receivers of the oil coming out of there, and India, but the rest of it was coming around and going into Britain. We don't need it. So, I mean, it's all in what you want to think, but you're dealing with some people that are not going to back down. They're not going to say, hey, we give up. They're not going to do that. And that's just the way I see it, and then this discussion with Ukraine and how the Zelensky there, the leader of Ukraine, he has made an open statement before the EU meeting about, hypothetically speaking, and maybe they should just take out a leader inside a certain country. And then the EU and most of them over there have pretty much turned their back on Zelensky since that took place, and that's been a couple of days ago or so. So then they're expecting for Zelensky to step up and issue an apology to this country that he insulted by saying that they should assassinate the leader. But this whole war that's going on over in Iran, I mean, don't kid yourself, it's been going on since way back. It's been going on way back, and whenever the Middle East, Persia, gets involved, the Persian and the Iranian people, they're pretty much considered majority Persian, and that's the way it stays. That's the way it's been. United States' birthday is coming up pretty soon, 250 years old, but then if you compare that to the Persian Empire and the dynasties and stuff that's been going on over there, they've been getting it on there for thousands of years. So I think the administration of thinking inside the country is kind of a little bit off its rocker. Is because just after that meeting with the oil leadership exploration companies of the world, the Strait of Hormuz was announced to where no ships could pass through. But when you say we have plenty of oil, we have more oil than anybody else, and then you come back out and you say, hey, I'm going to allow petroleum to jump another dollar on price, they're going to raise the price of fuel to raise the money from the American citizens and their working backs to pay for their newfound deals with what's going to happen inside Saudi Arabia and Iran and everything around it. That's exactly where it's going to go. You're not going to say, oh, it's because of those poor Iranian people are suffering under tyranny due to bad leadership. That's a mistake because they've been doing that. They've been doing that for a couple thousand years. You know, people better understand that. It's not because of a religion. It's not because of anything. It's just because that's always been uh, a dangerous accusation to deal with the Middle East. You know, it just always has been because nobody's ever essentially been able to just beat them at their own game. You know, and it don't matter what battle you think they won or anybody else won. Nobody's actually taken them out yet. You know, nobody's taken them out, and that's going to stay that way. But the main battle inside this country, you know, from different different points and different views about what people say and what they're talking about and all this other stuff, but then you go back to the facts. And I can remind anybody, I mean, you go on my community page, I shared a link on there about the 99 things wrong with the American Constitution. You know, that's an interesting video. It's not my video, I just shared it, but it gives all the way back to when they nailed the windows shut. This is an interesting angle. When they nailed those windows shut inside that building, and they went in there and sat down, and it was hot and muggy outside, and George Washington was there, and he only had one statement during the whole event, but there was an argument by future leaderships and people that we should actually have had a we should have chosen a king or a queen. There was people inside that room that actually thought we needed a king or we needed a queen or we needed to make the president able to we we needed to make the presidency to where they could run and be elected as many times as they wanted to, which gives way to a certain tyranny, tyrannical tyranny. So in the 1940s inside America, they changed the rule to where a candidate could run for no longer as president of the United States, but for only 2 terms, 8 years. That was as long as they could be the president. But certain rules of leadership and certain things about what people are listening to, and you got to pay attention to those guys. You got to understand that you don't have to like them, you don't have to dislike them, you just have to understand what their mindset is and what history mindset has been. And whenever you study the Constitution, and it's going to take you back to days when the Constitution and its thinking was not ratified. And what people don't understand is the Constitution's a short letter, one page. It was wrote on parchment made from an animal skin. If it wasn't for the fact that it was wrote down on parchment, animal skin, then it would have already disintegrated, because over time, the article, we the people, see, that's the Constitution, the misconstrued words of we the people, also, and some people's thinking included a certain leadership of government and establishment. It's like that Second Amendment article where everybody's wanting to know about the comma. What does the comma mean? But it means that video that I put on that community page is very important to understand. And it's about what people think their rights are under a certain constitution when they don't understand the original articles of Constitution. They don't understand the power that the leadership has in those articles. There was no article. There was never any word, and you can go look in it, in any of the Constitution and the articles, the Bill of Rights. There was no mention of a Democrat. You have to understand that it's never mentioned, not once, in none of the articles of Constitution and the Bill of Rights. There is not Democrats mentioned inside that. Not once. That once the Articles of Constitution was being signed and put into law, I mean, 60%, you have to understand, 60% of the people that were sitting inside that room, that building with the doors nailed shut, windows nailed shut, Benjamin Franklin, he was the oldest signer of the American Constitution. He was in his 80s at the time, and he was elderly, but he was there. And whatever he thought that Constitution was going to evolve into, he died to see it come to be. He never lived to see the outcome of the article that he was willing and agreeing to put his signature on. Even people inside that room that had suggested that we would elect a royalty leadership inside this country, after they didn't get their way, they ultimately signed the article. But there was 16 people inside that room that refused outright to sign that Constitution. It's kind of scary. And some people don't really understand that the academics and the connections to world powers and stuff, they were all right there inside that room. So to this day, there's still certain articles of the Constitution that have been ratified and put into law. There's a guy that's real interesting. There's a guy that actually uh, came out of nowhere and ran for office, got office, and made one of the laws actually finally get ratified. But whenever there's world power, whenever there's world power, and there's oligarchs, see, the oligarchs, that's your, I mean, that's your wealthy people. That's your Donald Trumps. That's your, you know, that's that's who these people are. Vladimir he's a billionaire. The Rothschilds of Britain, you know, super money. Elon Musk and all the rest of them, you know, they're billionaires. They're billionaires. So you got the association of power and money, and we're just the working stiffs. You got to understand that. I mean, there's some of the few that manage wealth. They get in the millions of, they might even get into billions of dollars in wealth, but they're not welcome like you would think into the oligarch club, the blue bloods. See, and the blue bloods are the ones that pull the strings. You know, everybody in that table sitting around Donald Trump in that meeting that reflect to the industry of oil and exploration and all of that. That's part of the strings that tug on him. And whenever they take we're wealthy on oil and natural gas, but instead of saying, hey, we're bringing the price of petroleum down last month, now this month, everybody, you know, instead of coming up there and getting $20 worth of gas, well, now you're coming to the same pump and that same $20, well, you just handed the oil companies $5 every time you put gas in your vehicle. And that's going to pay, you have to understand that, that's going to pay for all this new industry. Rather, they just taxed it. They took it up in price deliberately. You have to understand this. They took it up deliberately because if 100 million people just paid $5 more for gasoline today, well, that's $500 million. 2 days' time, they got $1 billion, and on and on and on. So now you got billions of dollars pouring out of the American people, the working people's pockets. And some people, they don't want to hear it, but it's the truth. It's pouring out of our pockets and it's going into theirs. So they can go start wars in other countries and prophesize about things, whatever you want to call it. But there's always this threat. So the gloves have got to come off. You know, it's best to be on the winning team. That's what I know. Sometimes you got to ask yourself, is it worth it? or is it not worth it? What's it going to get us into? Well, how unsafe is it going to make the people inside this country feel? It makes me feel pretty upset to think that we've got politicians in front of worldwide news saying we have a threat of terrorism inside this country. And there's a side of people inside this country, I know it is, that they go back and they say, that September 11th incident. And then there's another side of it that says, they passed laws inside that made our lives a little bit less freer inside this country, in which it did. So that was all based on a false propaganda of Saddam Hussein having nuclear capability when he didn't, because later when they found out that he didn't, well, they just moved on in. They moved into Afghanistan then, and kept us there for a pretty good while. So, a lot of times people say, well, I don't really understand what it is I'm hearing, and I always just try to help and point people in the right direction. I might not be completely plural in some of the things that I'm saying and trying to talk about, but the fact of the matter is the Iranians, man, they've been dug into them deserts and rocks inside that country for a long, long time. And they have weapons down underneath the ground in tunnels. This is not Gaza. This is not the people of Gaza. It's not the Houthis. This is Iran. And they've been doing things for a long, long time inside that country. And right now, it's real interesting. Every 90 minutes in Israel, they're getting hit by Iranian missiles and drones. Okay. It's been going on for a while now. I mean, it's been going on over there for a few months, couple months. And now the Iron Dome and some of the protection, ground protection inside Israel, they don't have it. It means that there was a couple of 2,000 pounder ballistics got right through just recently. It means that they're running out of missiles, they're running out of bullets to affect Iran. You have to understand, Israel has not been there that long. They don't have the arsenal, they don't have the military manpower, they don't have any of these things. That's why we sell them most defense weapons that they have, is to be able to defend themselves from Iran. Well, their arsenal is running a little bit low. So, which means that they're getting their weapons primarily from the United States and NATO. But the strain and all of this between Ukraine and Russia and all these other strains going on, it means that we, as a country, and I know I'm right on this, we are not prepared in no shape, form, or fashion to enter a foot war combat situation inside Iran. The best of the numbers has already been put on the table. It's unwinnable. You have to understand that. It's unwinnable. It's going to bury the United States military forces just like it did in Iraq. They're going to hide in the rocks, going to hide in the caves, Every time you go down the road, you're going to worry, is there something going to blow the track off my tank? What's going to happen? Because there's no way to get rid of that. Hey, Cha-Cha, how you doing, girl? But the thing about it is you got all these people thinking, and they're thinking with their dipsticks, you know. And whenever you have terrorists inside this country, at one time, yeah, they were capable of flying a fucking airplane into a fucking building, you know. So the thousands of people that lost their lives and got injured in that, just inside half a day of chaos. Well, now you have to understand that we have thousands of these people inside our country. And I know people said, oh, I don't know if they're going to do that. I said, well, it's a high possibility, and it's already been discussed by Trump administration in his first term and his second term, that all these people that came from these countries should be properly vetted. It means that just because a person came from Iran 20 years ago and they've established themselves inside a community and all this other stuff, well, in certain cases, that's what they're supposed to do. You see, they're supposed to be in your school, they're supposed to be in your neighborhood, you know, because that's they're getting paid, you know, to do that. Their houses has already been paid for. Their cars get paid for. They always seem to have money when nobody else has money. Something, but they're there. You know, we don't have we don't have these people vetted inside this country. And whenever you fail to vet these people inside this country, then I mentioned this the other night that during World War II, when they took Japanese people that were born people and citizens of America, they put them in holding camps all through this country. And they held them there, you know. They didn't just hold them there. They held them there until after the Japanese surrendered. They were stuck inside those work camps. And then they were released back into society. So then you've got people from Iran, you got people from Kabul, you got people in here from Syria, you got people here from everywhere that could lead to something. Rumor has it that some of the people that sacrificed their lives and crashed those planes into those buildings, that some of their family members, their immediate family members, never had to want for anything else for the rest of their life. You know, they guaranteed a really comfortable life for these family members after this person did that. But the the little conflict that the American citizens are being led to believe, you got to go back and do your research a little bit better, and don't assume that it's all for the intention of the safety of the American citizens. It means that Western Canada, Alberta, and some of the other ones are considering this 51st state deal, or are they going to make their own state and be their own country? And then you combine that with Alaska territory. And then you combine that with the Venezuelan vast oil region of Venezuela. And you put that up underneath the United States power. Then you got to understand this, you are the most powerful country on planet Earth. Because money, you can say gold is money. You can say dollar bills and fiat and Bitcoin. That's money. No, it ain't. I don't care how much you argue with yourself. Money is oil. You see, crude oil, black gold. That's where it comes from. Because oil controls the economy. Look at Cuba. I've been watching Cuba here lately. A lot of Cuba, they're without lights most of the time. A lot of them don't even have electricity anymore. They've been dealing with that. I mean, it's a serious thing when you got airplanes that have landed inside Cuba, commercial airplanes that can't, you understand, can't get the fuel for their plane to take off because there ain't none in Cuba to go in their plane, you see. Cuba will soon open up, and they already have negotiations with the United States to try to give the people of Cuba a chance to get back on their feet and their economy and what goes on there, because you know uh, just like canned cold drink, canned Coca-Cola 12-ounce can right now in Cuba is about $2.50 to $3 in U.S. currency. So you got to understand that, not pesos. So you're talking hundreds of pesos for one. A bottle of water right now costs about, it's like 200 pesos or something. But the they're in a real trouble with their food. Tomatoes are gold in Cuba. If you had a way to get 50 tons of red ripe tomatoes on the streets of Cuba, you could buy any house you wanted down there right now because of one tomato. They have bananas and other types of fruit, but they're short, and the government right now is issuing 7 pounds of rice on a government issue. They get 7 pounds of rice per family member per month. That's what they got. So a lot of hustling goes on, street hustling, you know, but there ain't no, if you can get on an airplane, go to another country, buy a bunch of stuff, and the airplane's willing to let you on the airplane with it, well, Cuba's not going to stop you from bringing it in. There's no embargo on food coming into the island of Cuba. And I've heard this 1,000 times, and I'm trying to say, hey, look, United States government and none of the people, they don't own not 1 inch of Cuba. And you say, oh, you're wrong. Guantanamo Bay. Well, Guantanamo Bay's been established for a very long time under a lease agreement, see, with Cuba, which means that every year since that began, the United States has sent a check to Cuba for the lease on the Guantanamo Bay. They've sent a rent check to them, and Cuba every year has rejected it. They don't want it. See, I mean, that's Cuba. But we're not looking to invade Cuba. You know, it's just time for the gangsters of Cuba to stop, you know, doing what they're doing to the Cuban people, Cuban nationals. There's Cuban nationals being housed inside United States prisons, USPs inside America to this day that are Cuban nationals that have already been convicted. You got to know this. They've already been convicted of their crime, whichever crime they committed by coming to the United States and served their time. But in order for them to be released, they have to be released back to Cuba, to their own country. And to this day, since the 70s, when I was a kid, I went to school in South Florida, and I remember it was a bunch of Cuban nationals there at that time. But a lot of the Cuban nationals that are being housed inside United States penitentiaries on special blocks that they keep them on, that are Cuban nationals that have already finished doing their time, but Cuba's not taking them back. So that's still going on. But this little thing with Venezuela, you know, no matter what people think, Venezuela essentially still has the same leadership it had, less Nicolas Maduro and his wife. All the little mayors and governors, city officials, and people out throughout that country that had their job still have their job. The only thing that changed was the head honcho, and now that's a woman. And then all of a sudden, things are just swell between the United States and Venezuela. And I listened to the conversations about the leading oil refinery exploration companies, you know, when they was at the table with Donald Trump just recently. We're discussing Venezuela and how they were going to take back a lot of the refineries that had been taken by the state, which means it was state owned instead of being owned by a private sector. And then the majority of that money that was being profited was going to be funneled back to the people of Venezuela. And at one time in history, recently, Venezuela had one of the wealthiest economies on the planet Earth, if you can believe that. Beautiful country. But now the war between the drug cartels, you know, all that. Well, the border wall down there, that's to keep people out. I get it. But it's also designed to keep people in, which means that if you want to try to escape the country with suitcases full of money and guns, and you got to get it past that border, or you got to get it on an airplane and you got to get it past that. I remember KP was asking me about that background check taking a little bit longer than it usually does because that's one of the major crackdowns on Homeland Security's some of their tactics that they're doing is everybody gets digital. They get digitally identified that comes across the border now. Every individual. And a lot of the people that have been crossing the border because of work or family or school, they've long been digitally identified, you know, but they've shut it all down. I mean, they're apprehending tons and tons and tons after day after day after day of drug contraband coming in from Mexico. They just have. There's a urgent need inside the United States in the market for illegal drugs in a certain area. The price went way up and the scarcity of it. So I don't think that and then that's what led to the cartels and the war starting between the cartel when we go down and take one of our information takes one of the cartel leaderships out. That's not going to do anything. Why? Because you have hundreds of thousands of cartel members inside Mexico. You see, you chop one head off and three more grow back, and then when the right ones grow back, then they go to war with each other over territory, which is going on right now down below Mexico City, down further in the south of Mexico. They want to control the border crossings, all the drugs coming in and out of South America. Venezuela, they want to be able to run in there and get involved in that. And they take every chance in the world, but they manage to be able to still get stuff inside this country. That's not going to change. If it ever changes, it's going to take a pretty good while to get all of that done for. So, I mean, it's one doesn't half another on that, but the fact of the matter is the border wall and the border security is important, and the drone technology and the ground sensor technology and everything else that's went into the border down there, which means that it just put logistics on hold. But the cartel leaders and members, well, hell, they live on both sides of the American border down there. People just kid themselves. They think, oh, we're going to build a wall and we're going to keep them over there on that side of the wall. The richest cartel members, some of them already live and reside inside this country. They're on both sides of that border. But this Iran war, it's not a war. There's been no official declaration of war signed by the administration or Congress inside this country, so it's not a war, no matter what anybody says. And you have to understand, I'll tell you one good thing you may not know. Presidential orders. There was never any rules established on anything but the second office of the United States, which is the administration. There was never any rule in there that said that a presidential order was a presidential order and how a president could issue presidential orders. If you understand what I'm saying, it didn't exist inside the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And the president's second administration, his office. Congress was the only one given the right of legislate, which means that no matter what presidential order Donald J. Trump signs, it doesn't affect the changes of laws. Only Congress has the power to do that, which, if anybody understands it, it's clear to them. But in the beginning, they only wanted 2 senators to represent each state. That gave the bigger states and the smaller states both equal opportunity to cast their equal vote on legislation. And the fact of the matter is it you only see it in its real form, and there's a link. There's a video down there in my community page about it and the Constitution and the real powers and who holds the real powers inside this country. And whenever, I know everybody probably has encountered a lawyer at one point in their life, and they think, man, I need to get a lawyer to help me get this figured out. Well, the Constitution was written by some of the most educated people in law and legislate and all this other stuff. That's how they designed it. It was designed that way. And in the original Constitution and the Bill of Rights, you can read it, that there is no person that can't be an attorney or a lawyer. You have a right to even self-representation. So then later in history, when wordings and paragraphs and stuff become so complex that it has to involve attorneys to sort it out. But in the original Constitution, there was no requirements to be a lawyer. You didn't even have to go to school to practice law, but you were considered a lawyer only because you have right for self-representation. And that goes by somebody sometimes. It means a lot of times whenever you've already done put yourself through the trouble of paying an attorney to just stand up there in a courtroom and say, okay, we're going to agree to that. The fact of the matter is that attorney never had to even be there if you was willing to agree to that. You could have self-represented yourself in that. But the complexities behind the legal this and legal that, there's in all of the history of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, there's only been something like 20 or 27 of the amendments that's actually been ratified into law out of all the thousands and thousands of legislative bills being passed, trying to pass through Congress. And here's another thing, the Supreme Court justices inside the United States. The Supreme Court justices, man, it doesn't matter. There was never, and you can ask anybody, a legal scholar, and they're going to tell you this. There was never any number designated to the Supreme Court. There could be 3, there could be 2, there could be, right now we have 9, Supreme Court justices sitting around looking at something that they could say, well, this is against the Constitution, or this ain't against the Constitution, or we're going to go ahead and sign off of this and put it into law based on Congress. They examined the article and found it legal to be under the Constitution and protections of the Constitution, so they don't interfere with it. But the Supreme Court justices inside the United States, it doesn't matter if we only have 3 of them, or if we have 9 of them, or if we have 4 of them, it doesn't matter. There was never any rule that said you could have all of the Supreme Court justices you want, or as less as you think you need. So that might help you sometime in the future to know that the more justices that are jammed into the Supreme Court, it means they have a way of dragging out things that could be unconstitutional for years, because this Supreme Court justice is not in agreement with the rest of the Supreme Court justice, so it's going to be this never-ending battle between them passing paperwork back and forth between themselves and examining these things. So the more Supreme Court justices it gets assigned, then the more confusing things become, and it's done with intention. And I've heard this 100 times, and they say, well, this federal judge said Trump can't do this. And you say, hold on a minute, I'm going to say this, and I don't care, it's recorded, big deal. A tyrannical black-robed tyrant from the U.S. District Court. The District Court my ass. The District Court has no power over the office of second office. They hold no power over Donald J. Trump and his administration. None of the circuit court, federal court systems inside this country. They cannot and are not bound legally to control the office of the administration, no matter how complex that may sound. It means that the president's office is in charge of the national security of this country, not the circuit court, federal court system. Only Congress and the Supreme Court and Donald J. Trump and his administration are responsible for the protection of the country and things that the office has to do, even if it's speculation, to protect the country from an enemy. Well, that's why in the second office, the president reserves the right to pardon himself and any member as a citizen of his administration or inside his country. He has the oath of pardon. He can say, well, I thought it was going to cause a threat, so we blew some shit up in this country. He can write himself a pardon. The fact of the matter is, the federal circuit court has no jurisdiction over the president and his administration, nor immigrations judges. They're all separate. Separation of powers documents. So whenever you hear this Fox News blasting out or CNN's blasting out some propaganda about how some federal judge has ruled an injunction against Donald Trump, what is it, a crime? Did he commit a crime inside this country to another citizen of this country? No, he did not. Then they have no jurisdiction over that. So they try to prove that ICE is physically harming people, citizens of this country, putting them in the back of cars, beating them up, putting them in. They're putting them in facilities and keeping them in there for days before they release them. All this other shit's being proposed. Last time I checked, I think I worked for INS for around 14 years. If people didn't know that, I think some of you do. I don't give a shit how you are, who you are, what you are, who you work for, or anything else. When I come across you in my career, I don't care. It means nothing to me. As a federal officer of the Border Patrol, INS, if they say, sir, could you step inside that room right there and sit down in that chair till I'm going to get to you? You will go inside that room and you will sit in that chair if we have to put you in there by force. See, they have jail cells right down there at the port of entries inside this country. It means that a federal officer of immigration has right to detain. It doesn't matter your citizenship or not. See, and that's a big mistake people make. They jump out there and say, hey, you can't do this to me. I'm a citizen. You know how many people you say, hey, you got to go inside this room over here and you got to sober up. And you can't leave until somebody comes over here and gets you. Why? Because you just came over here from Mexico after you went over there and you got drunker and shit. You barely made it across the bridge over there. Sit down. Call a relative. Call somebody. I've done it. They're going to come up there to the damn port of entry. They're going to get your ass. They're going to put you in a vehicle and they're going to carry you home. I have no authority to arrest you. And I can give you a rundown on it. I mean, if I say, hey, I got somebody here that's got something inside his car that's not supposed to be inside his car. All right. Before that moment happens, you don't get detained. I'm just going to ask you kindly to go step over there. If I find something inside this vehicle, I'm going to detain you. I'm going to take you inside that detainment center, inside that facility, put you behind a solid steel door with a pipe flap on it, pull the latch. One of the other federal agents is going to get on the phone to a local. You got to understand this. A local person is going to say, hey, this is contraband, bringing contraband into this country. So a federal official gets involved, one of the attorneys, and they either bring charges or they don't bring charges. And if they don't bring charges, you go in there and you say, hey, it's your lucky day. They're not going to prosecute you for this. You're just a gatekeeper. So when you don't understand what really happens and how people get in and out of these countries or anything else, but it's a well-known fact, back a couple of years ago, I mean, they was using all the Border Patrol agents and immigrations as daycare centers, you know. They were sending people across the border in swarms, and they're overwhelming kids and women and people that need attention. They got to have food, they got to have water, they might have medical attention. So You're dealing with all of these people, and then hundreds and hundreds and thousands of people are coming across the border, and you don't even know who they are. When they drop their passport on the other side of the fence and tear it up and throw it over in the bushes, and they cross that border, they could say whoever they want to say their name is. So now, here lately, we've been digitally identifying people, all people coming in and out of the country, airports, buses, planes, trains, and automobiles. But this little thing with Iran, that's something that's inevitable, that says that no matter how many people are sitting out there cheering and saying, oh, yeah, we're going to go in there and kick some ass. We're going to go in there and kick some ass, and we're going to take Iran. And I'm going to say, you must be a fool. Because I gave you 8 years in a desert in Afghanistan, and we didn't take that one, did we? And a lot of people got killed, maimed, injured. There's poor fellas and women and men that came back to this country that don't even know who the fuck they are anymore. They're just a fucking vegetable sitting in a fucking chair because somebody made some kind of crazy propaganda of somebody might have a nuclear weapon. And it sort of sounds familiar, you know. Iran, they have a right to produce nuclear power inside that country. You know, the refinement of whatever they think there is, well, how do you figure you think you know what it is when certain things has already done been blown the fuck up, you see? It's like hide the hot dog. It's the same kind of approach that they used in Desert Storm. Same kind of approach they used there to go back up in there and obliterate the fuck out of Saddam Hussein and his forces, to find out that there was really nothing there. And then it wound up keeping our men in the desert over there for a very long time, dying for no cause except for to sit around and play guard to the oil oligarchy, you see. Because ever since way back when, before World War II, Britain, United States, and a lot of other people have been heavily invested. You got to understand that, heavily invested in that oil before the United States goes jumping into a battle and the people is being fooled into thinking. The fact of the matter is that battle's been going on since a lot of your grandparents were kids, you see. My dad's 87 years old, and he can tell me about, he was only a child during World War II. He was just a young person, and what it was about. And that's what it's about. I mean, I got some of them videos and stuff up in my description, and not my description, but on my community page. There's a couple of good videos. They're real informative. They're simple. They're not drug out. They're not long-winded. I think one of them's like a couple of hours. They tell you about things you didn't know about the Constitution and how you think going out here and waving all these flags, don't tread on me, don't do this, don't my Constitution. I've seen people with that "We the People" article plastered on the back window of their pickup truck. And I'm thinking, well, why would you do that? Because the lack of knowledge behind that document is what's got you all fooled. Like I said, there was a majority of the people inside that room with the windows nailed shut that were leading into the idea of an elected royalty or a president for life. You see, whenever that person gets elected, they're there till they die, and then along comes the next one. So they didn't want it to be a royal thing. They wanted to make George Washington president for his life, for the rest of his life, George Washington. And the only thing that George Washington mentioned didn't have anything to do with the articles of the Constitution. It had something to do with something else that they was trying to work out. And he only had one statement, and that was it. It wasn't even anything to do with the Constitution. It's wrote all down. And a lot of the people that were in that room, some of the people wrote very descriptions. They had descriptions of what was being said and talked about, and this might learn you something, darn you, that those articles of what was being discussed inside that room, they didn't get heard until 100 years later, you know. So, in a nutshell, it means that don't get the wool pulled over your eye by going out here and standing on some constitutional right that you may not have. And then they actually, the Ninth Amendment, see, a lot of people are not real familiar with the Ninth Amendment. It identifies arbitration, which means that things that are not established but left up to the people, we the people. But the understanding of the we the people was, it's one of the biggest misconceptions that there is, you know. Why? Because nothing below the first article, nothing above the first article of Constitution has anything to do with we the people. It was just a metaphor. It's sort of like when people say, make America great again. Well, that was their way of saying we the people. And that every the people that were in that room, they were entirely against a two-party government. They absolutely did not want anything to do with a democracy. Why? Because if you go back and you do your history and Constitution, it's going to specifically say that democratic countries and rulers lead to tyranny in every case. You have to understand that. And people just don't get that only because they know their history. They know how old their kids are, when their mama was born. They know when their parents bought their first house. They know their family history, but they don't know the country's history in which they're living. And then when somebody comes out of left field talking about something Trump's doing or some politician's doing, then they all get excited, or one way or the other, they get mad. But the same shit's been going on since they nailed the window shut inside that building and wrote the article of Constitution. And there was no, at the time of the Constitution, there was no bill on the table of rights for the people inside this country. The Bill of Rights didn't come along until after the Constitution was agreed on. How they were going to structure their government. That's what that article is. The Constitution. How the government was established as a nation. It didn't have anything to do with we the people. See? And people don't see it that way, but it's true. There was people inside that room that were in objection because the lag. They had the lack of certain documents to attach to that. That's why they protested it and refused to sign the Articles of Constitution. It's because at that point, he didn't have any articles in there to protect the regular people inside this country, only government. And the will, in some cases, to have a royalty. They wanted to choose a royalty over an elected president to run this country, and that just scared the fuck out of a lot of people. And those people existed inside that room. But there had to be a declaration. There was no declaration at the time of the Constitution, and the Constitution is not articles of declaration. It's not a declaration. It's an independence. The Declaration of Independence that came before the Constitution. But the Articles of We the People, they didn't come till after the Constitution was signed. But it's a rabbit hole, whichever one you want to run down. And I'm going to guarantee you this. I'm fixing to get off of here. I've been sitting on this thing for a couple of hours already, but the fact of the matter is Iran will be one of the biggest, most confusing, complicated rabbit hole that the United States has ever tried to run down. And that's not going to be a good thing for the American people to be fooled into thinking that the American forces are going to rule by power inside Iran. It'll be a never-ending battle. That's what it'll be. And it'll turn into arms affairs, you know. Who's buying the most bullets? Who's buying the most tanks? It'll be that kind of deal. And who's trying to protect the biggest part of the oil interest there. If they shut down the Houthi activity and the Iranian activity at the Strait of Hormuz choke point, if they shut down the threat, well, they're going to be there for years. Years. The only way that that country can be invaded on a foot invasion with any effect is going to be southeast of the Strait of Hormuz passage there. That's the only way that boots are going to hit the ground. And after that, they got a long way to travel up to the strait. But I think that sanctions against food and water and everything else, that's not going to take place. I think that a few more of the, and it's a war crime to knock electricity out, to target electrical power plants. You can knock out the substations, but you can't knock out the power plants. Else, Vladimir Putin would have already done that to Ukraine. And that's why Ukraine don't blow the power plants up and Russia don't blow the power plants up. It it forces other countries' involvement into that. Whenever somebody else starts blowing up electrical power stations and restricting the flow of commodities and food to the civilians that live inside the conflict zone. It's under the world law. But anyways, until I decide to come back on here again, I'm going to go ahead and tell everybody thanks for listening. Thanks for coming by. visit my community page. There's some pretty good information on there that might help you survive through your mind of thinking. And until next time, Donna's out. What's up, Teresa?